So, Sister Nena, over to you. You can go ahead and just lead us in conversations this evening.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm trying to look for the best spot for the light. You know, I think Pastor Lolu, you're a pro. So the light, I'm trying to get the best angle for the lights. Is this better? Is this better, everyone?
Yes,
hello?
that's good. That's okay.
You can see. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of our Bible reading. And Sister Tokes isn't here, so I'm sitting in for Sister Tokes. I will try to be a very good host. I know she's so good. She has the gift of the gab, but we'll try. God will bless us. And as we, delve into his word. So we read, I don't know, Pastor Laula, do you have the stats? I don't have the stats. Do you want to share the stats with us to show how many chapters we've read to date and how many chapters we have left?
Okay, just keep going. I'm going to pull up the stats, but you keep going and I'll get the stats ready. Okay,
so congratulations to everyone who has made it so far on this journey. I don't know, I want to throw it open. I took down some notes, and there was something I shared on another platform with Pastor Laulu, and it was something about teaching us how to study the Bible, and some more tips. And I shared that, and I decided that, I was going to write down what I learned according to those things. So I just want to ask anyone, is there anything that jumped out at anybody this week? Anything you want to ask? Anything that you want to discuss or you noted, or anything that was a bit confusing? So I'm throwing the floor open to everyone. I wrote down my questions, but I don't want to start with me. So let's start with you. Any questions? You could just unmute and ask the question, or you could, by way of showing hands. Anyone?
Sister Nana, good evening.
Hi.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Okay, so I was just looking at last week's what do I call now? Questions, rather. There was a question that wasn't answered, so maybe I could just put it out there. I think it was from Brother Paul, and it says Abraham had to entrust them into God's hands. Could this be his fate since God authorized the separation?
Okay, so we're talking about Hagar now and Ishmael.
Yeah, that was from last week. That was the question that wasn't answered.
Okay, so I'm a bit confused. Did Abraham entrust them to God?
So you can maybe explain that better. And there's another one from Indidi, which I could tell after that.
Okay. Brother Paul, do you want to ask your question?
Sorry, it wasn't a question. It was more of a comment than a question.
That when he sent them away, he had entrusted them in God's hands.
Yeah. It was more of a comment than a question.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So the next question was, can we talk about Cain? What exactly did he do wrong such that God did not respect his offering? That question was from Indidi. Don't know if she's on the call.
All right.
He wants to know why God did not accept Cain's offering.
Does anybody want to respond to that?
Okay.
I could respond to that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
You want to go first? Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that there are a few scriptural reasons and a few theological points of view on that. But Nena, I'd like to hear your view as well, and then I'll chip in on anything different
Okay, so I know that, when Cain went into a sulk and God asked him a question and he said, why are you so downcast? And he said to him, if you do well, you will be accepted. But if you do not, sin is crouching at your door and it seeks to have you, but you must master it. You must master over it. So what God said to him is that if you do well, so what that says to me is that he didn't do well. His offering, there was something wrong with his offering. For Cain and for Abel, the Bible says that he went and got the best. He got the young, the fat, the suckling. So he probably got the best of his offering. And for God to say that Cain didn't do well, between the two of them, Cain would know that really he didn't try. And God pointed that out to him that if you do well, won't you be accepted? But if you don't, this is the case. So that's my own thinking. Now, I've heard a lot of people go on to say that he brought an offering that was not acceptable to the Lord. Maybe he got things that were no good. But then there's also another school of thought that says that God's offering was an animal. So he didn't bring an animal, so it wasn't acceptable to the Lord. But I don't think that's correct, because we know that when they were burnt offerings, they also had oil. They also had, in Moses' time, there was oil, there was the grain offering, and all those offerings alongside with the other offerings. So I think he just didn't do well with the offering that he brought to the Lord, and that's why it wasn't acceptable. Thank you. That's my own thinking. Pastor Olaolu.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nena. Does anyone else have any other opinions on that before I say anything? Just in case anyone wanted to chip in, add to what Nena had to say.
Hi, Pastor. Maybe just to add a bit of color to it.
Yeah.
I think I've done a bit more study since last week, and I think we all grew up, or not all, but if you grew up in the church, you understand the story of Cain and Abel. And I don't know, there's something about reading the Bible through this process where I do feel like my mind is slightly in just a very inquisitive place. And I really love what you say about the questions that come to you are, the questions that God is particularly speaking to, because I think we all, those of us who grew up in the church, understand the story of Cain and Abel. But when you read it, the Bible actually doesn't say that much about it. And so for me, when I'm reading, I'm like, where did I get this impression from? Why was I so adamant that Cain was a bad person? And I think, Nena, you're exactly right. The Bible just alludes to that Abel, the NLT version says the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. But it said Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. It also made it clear that Abel was a shepherd while Cain cultivated the ground. And so I don't know how to explain it, but it almost feels like you have to go and do extra reading or, study before the things that we just were taught you really see for yourself, if that makes sense. The Bible on the quote unquote surface of it doesn't allude to that much. If you just read this, I actually was like, oh, well, I can probably understand why Cain's upset. Why did you reject my offering? But then obviously when you go and study, and I'm sure you're going to be able to bring more color to it, Pastor Olaolu, but there's just something about that idea of, on the surface of it, the Bible doesn't always go into so much detail, yet in the church there is so much detail around certain stories, and it's made me wonder, where did I get that from? Did I discover that for myself, or is that in stories of growing up that these people have become, much more colorful in their characters? Whereas when you just look at the words, it's not always that deep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. And I'm glad you're saying that, because there are a lot of things that we have heard over the years that have just kind of formed part of our understanding of belief systems, and we haven't really ever challenged them. And I'm glad, you're seeing things, from that place where you're actually asking yourself those questions. Is this from me? Is this what I heard? Or is this actually what the scriptures are saying? And that's so important. And like you said, sometimes when you look at certain things in the Bible, it looks so simple. But again, in that simplicity, there might be a lot of detail that you can gloss over if you don't stop to think about it. And this is why it's so good what we are doing. And like I mentioned last week, somebody said something, and I talked about the imagination and getting yourself into that story and seeing, okay, why was this person upset? Why was Cain upset? Yeah, I mean, if I brought the best of my, I'm a farmer, and what I have is produce from the field. Why should God reject my offering? Because some theologians would say that, Cain and Abel knew that the offering that needed to be made was the offering of a lamb or a blood offering. But again, like both of you have rightly pointed out, later on in the scripture we see that sheaves which are from the ground were also offered to God, and God accepted it. Flour, oil, these things were produced from the field and not necessarily a blood offering, and God accepted that. So why did God reject Cain's offering in that regard? And I think, Nena, you've hit it on the head by pointing out that there was something that was not right about his heart. And the Bible talks about if you have an offering and you've discovered, Jesus said this, and you discover that there's an issue between you and your brother, he says, go and settle with your brother first before you offer your offering. So there must have been something in Cain's heart that was not right towards his brother. And we see that manifesting because he now eventually killed his brother. But even before he even killed his brother, God was pointing it out to him and saying, look, Cain, there's something not right in your heart. And if you don't do something about it now, sin is going to have dominion over you. So you have to do something about it now. So God also told him that there was something not right, and Cain needed to fix that. But instead of fixing that, he got upset with his brother and allowed sin to have the better of him. So I would stop there. I can see Tola has a hand up. Yeah, Tola, over to you. Hi, Tola, I saw your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and say something?
Sorry, yeah, I was just talking, didn't realize I was not. Good evening, everyone. I just, just something in relation to exactly the point you raised, but I just saw something that struck me, and I don't know whether that again was perhaps it was the reflection of the heart that we're talking about, or whether it's just the translation I've got. When I checked with NLT and even the Message one, it's interesting the way it talked about Cain's gift, Cain's what he brought. It just says in NLT, was saying Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. I think Message just said just brought a gift or something. And then Abel itself, it says he brought the best portions of the first lambs from his flock. Is that just a translation thing? Because I just saw the NLT and Message Bible. So it kind of struck me as to, was it the way he just presented it? Quite a very, I'll just grab, sometimes you think about how, let me just give this. And then, or how you actually prepare what you give to God. You've consciously picked it, chosen what's best. That means you've literally scanned through, all the things that you had and decided, this is what I'm going to give. So, that was just what struck me. Is there a correlation with that, with his heart, whereby Cain just picked something and Abel has put more thought to it?
Anybody want to answer that? Anyone? I cannot see hands up.
Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Here. I was just going to say that maybe it's not just the maybe it's not just what was offered, but it's also the heart in preparing what, choosing the best. That person must have, it's like a child giving their parents something and two children. The one that gives the best, that shows that the child really made an effort, and so it's not just what they've given, but their thought into giving that thing, finding those things and choosing the best for their parents. So it's what's in their hearts, basically. Well.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for me. Tony has her hand up as well, Nena.
Okay, I can't see from where I am who's raising their hand, so just let me know.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah, I was just going to mirror what everybody said in terms of, I think it's more to do with what was in Cain's heart, because like I say, he ended up being, it seemed that he was more upset that God had accepted Abel's gift than he was that God rejected his. And like I say, he went on to kill him. And there was no reason for him to kill his brother because God didn't accept his own gift. It had nothing to do with his brother. So why did he kill his brother? So obviously, that was in his heart. But I think somebody else had spoken earlier about the Bible and how it paraphrases, not paraphrases, it gives like very sort of simple details. And this is from my experience, but before COVID, I was part of a book club, and we used to do prose and we used to do poetry. And prose kind of goes in and gives details and a lot of details. And poetry is like very brief, very succinct. And you sort of have to read between the lines. And I find that the Bible is mostly poetry, and it gives very brief information. And you support, because again, I keep going back and saying the people that wrote the Bible in those days, the Bible was written by people who could read, and only a handful of people could read. So it was the understanding that if you picked up this book, you understood, you were learned, you were trained in reading and writing. So I think it was written for people who could read and write. So there was no need to go into elaborate detail, because I suppose the understanding was from people who wrote this document that whoever picks it up will understand it. And if you didn't understand it, oh, that's your business. But I think it was written by intellectual people for intellectual people. And that's why it's like gives sort of succinct details enough that you can read between the lines. Because if it says God wasn't happy with his gift, then it's for you to now decide that, do you know what? He didn't do something right. Because if God was happy with his gift, he would have accepted both offerings. But obviously something was wrong. And ultimately, instead of going through all the details, I don't think it matters what it was that was wrong. The point was that, he did something wrong. And we know that he eventually killed his brother. So I think that is pretty much the gist of it. You sort of read between the lines, because there's a lot of the Bible. I mean, I'm not very good. I'm not a fan of poetry at all. So I really, really struggle sometimes with the Bible. And that's why I think I probably cope better with the New Testament than the Old Testament, because the Old Testament tends to be poetry. And it does, present itself in that way where you're supposed to read between the lines, between line 1 and line 2. There's 50 lines in between, and you're supposed to sort of fill in the gaps. It doesn't have to be explained to you. So I think that's one of the things with the Old Testament is old Jewish poetry written by highly intellectual people for intellectual people. And then it's for us that's picking us up to this sort of decipher it and read. I suppose like this is where these sessions help when you come to these sort of sessions. And I mean, for me personally, I tend to go on YouTube and listen to some other people. Some people do their theses on different books of the Bible and things like that. And you sort of get an insight from them as to what I see theologians and such like that. You get an insight from them as to what exactly all those sort of missing lines, as it were, we fill in the gaps and try and understand what it all meant. But I think ultimately, Cain did not do what God wanted him to do. And you can see from his reaction to God's rejection of his gift that God was right, because he killed his brother for no reason, absolutely no reason whatsoever. So I think obviously God had seen that, obviously seen into his heart. I don't think it was the gift per se. I think it was more of a case of he just put together any old thing, where his brother seemed to make more of an effort. And I think he was upset with his brother because his brother made an effort and made him look bad. So I suppose we can infer that from it. So that's my take on the matter.
Thank you, Sister Toyin. Thanks, everyone, and good points. So, Ndidi, I hope that answers your question. I think maybe we can move on to this week and what we learned. So let's unpack this week. Pastor Laulu, we still don't have your stats, but we'll just continue. So
yes, the stats, the chart is not showing. I'm trying to fix that.
Okay.
I'm looking at it.
Okay, I'll keep going though. So did anything stand? So we've answered some questions for last week. We only have about 30 minutes left.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Sister Fumi had her hands up.
Okay,
I know
go
you
ahead.
can't see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, go on. Sister Fumi.
Yes. When I was reading today's passage about Abraham and how he loved Joseph more than his other children, and the way he showed his love to his son.
Jacob. You mean Jacob?
Sorry, Jacob. Yeah. How he loved Rachel's son Joseph more than the other sons, and I felt like the way he expressed his love for his son was maybe a bit too much. I'm not saying it justifies what his other brothers did, but sometimes you don't want to show your other kids that you prefer a child more than the other. So was that right for him to show his love more than he showed for his other children, making a coat for him, doing, because it feels to me like God was wanting this story to happen, using Jacob to want this story to happen.
I feel you. And Sister Fuma, you done? I wanted to add to that so that whoever is responding will think about it. His own mother had twins and preferred Jacob over Esau. How do you explain that? That the mother would have two children and she prefer one.
So it's like God was wanting that to happen all from back then, right here.
Yeah, so so she's saying Jacob loved Joseph more, and then his own mother loved him more than his son. I mean, Esau. It speaks to parenting. The truth is, I don't know about everybody, but you will always have one child that you probably prefer to the other. Probably because the person's character is different, so it endears you more to that person. Not that you don't love all your children, but you may have one that you're endeared to more. So how do you handle that in the face of what we have seen and the consequences? Because Rebecca loved Jacob more than she loved Jacob, or preferred kind of, and wanted him to get the blessing. And even when he was telling her that, Mom, I could get cursed for this, said, let the curse be on me. She just wanted him to be blessed at all costs. And then there is the Jacob again doing the exact same thing to his son Joseph. So how do we explain that in the place of parenting? I'm just speaking to what Sister Fumi is saying. How can someone answer both of us? Because that stood out for me as well.
Sorry, not to whoever's going to answer this has multiple layers to answer, because like I had this same question, but it goes even deeper than what you're saying then as well, because on top of that, like God still honored them. Like that was my thing, that I felt the exact same way about Rebecca. I was like, oh my goodness. But not only that, they tricked Jacob, and that was still the line that God blessed, right? And there are quite a few examples where, look what Abraham did with Sarah, and same thing, Rebecca, that so many generations of, actually they were quite trickery, like they tricked people. They weren't necessarily always honest. But that specific example, I was really reflecting on the fact that God saw what they did. They lied, they deceived. Again, in this example, I feel like Esau was the victim in all of this. And again, historically, I don't really feel like I remember thinking about him in that way. But as you read it, you're like, oh my goodness. And then the fact that he was so gracious when he then saw his brother down the line. So yeah, not only how could Rebecca do that, but also God honored that. And that felt to me really interesting. So exactly as you said, is it that this thing was going to happen? God, like this line is blessed. I'm going to do whatever needs to happen. I'm just going to turn a blind eye. But I was very, very struck by that whole thing.
Yeah, and I think also if you remember, we're talking about Cain as well. If you remember Cain, God also blessed Cain, because when he sent him away, and Cain said, I don't know who other people were. And Cain said, God, don't send me away because people will kill me. And God said, anybody that touch you, I will punish them. So I think it probably just speaks to possibly how flawed we are as human beings on a different level. I mean, forgetting nowadays, because obviously our thinking now is very, very different from thinking 2,000 years ago. So I think it was quite normal in those days to favor one child over another, quite frankly, because they all did it. So I think it's quite different for us as it is then. But I say God still bless them. And as what you've exactly just said, I think if we talk about it in our own lives, that no matter what, we could judge ourselves exactly the same way, and we still pray to God when we need something, when we need his help, when we need his guidance. And he still answers our prayers, despite everything that we've done. Because we all lie and steal and cheat and do all the wrong things. When you're reading it from the Bible's perspective, you think, Jesus Christ, this guy's got away with murder. But so do we, and God still blesses us. So I think maybe that is the message. But I think in terms of the favoritism, I think it was a normal thing in those days. I think you picked a child that you liked and you ran with it. And everybody else does their business. But, I don't think we can compare their thinking then to our thinking now. Is different times.
Yeah. So what I'm saying, Sister Tony, is that it happens to the best of us. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking for myself. What we have learned is that regardless of whether you're endeared to a particular child, you must not show it. You must make a conscious effort to treat all your children equally and give them the same attention, the same or maybe perhaps if someone has special needs, okay, you pay more attention. But if they're all on the same pedestal, treat them equally, give them equal love. Don't do anything more for one child or the other, because it will impact them even in our today. That's the lesson we're learning from these things. But wasn't
it because Jacob had Joseph in his old age? Wasn't that explained somewhere?
Okay, they said because he was
Rebecca.
They said because he loved him. They said he loved her. He loved him because he was a child of his old age. But then he had Benjamin after him.
He did. And remember that was Rebecca's first child, because remember Rebecca was barren for a long time.
First child.
Rachel, yeah.
So we understand that, but we're saying that whatever be the case, it landed him into trouble. And yeah, it got.
We're looking at it from hindsight, though. You wouldn't have known that, yeah.
No, but okay, so we're looking at it from. Let's even look at even Jacob. See what the mother did. She preferred her son over the other, and then see what happened.
Isaac preferred Esau now, so it was the dumb thing.
But Isaac chose the one, and Rebecca chose the other.
I was giving him suya. He liked the one that was giving him nice ram suya, right? Yes. But that doesn't mean that Isaac would have done wrong. We don't know. Well, I can't say, but we're just assuming that Isaac would not have gone to any length to ensure that Esau would get the blessing, if that was to be the case. But Rebecca was prepared to take a curse on herself just to see her son blessed. And meanwhile, it's not his cousin. It's my children, my firstborn. I want that I want to get it. So speaking to what someone said, sorry, I didn't quite pick the name, but forgive me, the second speaker, she said something about they got the blessing. So this is my thinking. Sorry if I'm saying this, but I just want to share, because I want to share, and I need someone to help me. So God said to Rebecca that 2 nations are in your womb, and the older will serve the younger. So things were set in motion. But for that to happen, Jacob deceitfully obtained the blessing. Deceitfully obtained the blessing. So my point is it possible that there could have been another way for him to have received the blessing? Could there have been another way for him to, without having to deceive? Can you see me, please?
Yeah, we can see you.
Yes. Could he have obtained the blessing in any other way without having to deceive his father? Or was it in the divine plan that he's going to receive this blessing through trickery, but I will bless him anyway. Because
Okay,
he has value, because he values spiritual things while his brother does not. So why didn't he just come out first then?
Okay, we have Ayo and Tola putting up their hands. So
Okay, good.
let's hear from them.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Oh, Pastor Ayo, please talk.
No, go ahead.
Let me let you
Ahead.
talk. No, please talk. Pastor is talking.
Please go ahead, honestly, because I think probably more question than answer. So, Tola, please go ahead, please. Thank you.
I suppose what I just wanted to say was, and I suppose it was linked as well when we look at the story of Jacob later on with his wives and everything. And I think for me, what I just saw was the flawed nature of man, how we will try our ways and try and work things out. And sometimes, even evil, cunning ways. But my own thoughts was really that he could have obtained it. In answer to your question, I felt that he could have obtained it a different way, even if he didn't obtain it via that trickery, in the sense that I just believe that God's plan would still have come to pass. And we see how even in Jacob's life, the strife in his home and how they kind of still planned all sorts of evil, his children, just like how when they were in Shechem later on, but they slaughtered all the people, all of that, deceived them and everything. And it just seems like I just felt that God's agenda really would still come to pass. And I think for me, what was humbling was the fact that we are all flawed, and somehow God still, when you call on him, he hears you, he overlooks even our mistakes and things like that. So that was my own thinking, really, that none of us is perfect. We do, our intentions are not always right, but calling on God in the instances when they did, he does save, he does restore.
Okay.
Thanks, though. I think more or less same line of thinking, to be honest with you. I think the way the scripture starts and sets this out started with God clearly defining that even though these two guys are two nations, God already set out who he preferred. So Esau from the get-go, he had it against him, essentially, if you want to use that. And the reality is that if God's proposed something, whatever you do against it is going to eventually work for it. So I don't know, I don't have the answers. I don't know why God decided to favor one and above the other, but I think everything that happened in their lives were a result of that choice. Also, Esau selling his birthright. That was a conscious decision. That was him deciding it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm going to give it to you anyway. And he sold his birthright. So it was only an outcome of it that it got his blessing. A lot of times we're trying to pray our way out of what we behaved ourselves into. He was hoping to, after selling his birthright, he was hoping to then get the blessings of the firstborn, even though it was no longer. And then Rachel brought the machination into just to ensure that the son who was rightfully the right got it. There's a lot to unpack in it. There's a lot to think about. But I also realize Jacob loving one son and Rachel loving the other is quite. Oh, sorry, Isaac loving one child and Rebecca loving the other one there's quite a lot to unpack. Interestingly, I had that conversation yesterday. One of my sons, I was taking him for an activity and he was saying, I'm your favorite child, right? I'm thinking, favorite child indeed. I said, I love you with all my heart. He said, yes, I know I'm your favorite. I said, no, I love your brother with all my heart too. He said, is that possible? I said, yes, it is possible. I love both of you with all of my heart, But we have learned, at least we've had examples or experiences of people like Jacob and used to lean on and to be able to do things better. But It's a lot, but I think it all goes back to God's ordination. It all goes back to God's plan, and things will just always fall in line to ensure that God's purpose is done. It's the only way I can explain that to myself. Thank you.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Any other hands up? Because my hand's up.
Yes, Bibo's hand was up and Fumi's hand is up now.
Okay.
Everyone said everything I wanted to say. I was just gonna say Esau sold his birthright, and Pastor Aya said that, and every other thing I was gonna say. Joseph was preferred, was loved because of because of the way Jacob loved Raquel. So basically all grounds have been covered.
Okay, thank you. Fumi?
Yeah, it's mine. Mine is not a question. It's more an inquisitive around when Reuben wanted to help Joseph. They're not from the same mother. Their mothers are, they're sisters, but I just wondered, what kind of person is Reuben to, the first child? Normally it's the first child that wants to be in control and doesn't like, but the first child wanting to help almost the last child. What kind of person is he? So I went online and I checked up about him. And interestingly, what I found was that he slept with Bilal, which is Rachel's house help, which is terrible. His mom's the other wife's servants. So I said, oh, this person is a nice guy, but then I found this one that is, it's really terrible. So it's just like, yeah, I don't know.
Anybody have any questions around that?
I don't have a question around that, though, but just I have another question. So that I don't forget. How come Jacob? I couldn't comprehend why is it that Jacob, is it Jacob now? Isaac only had one blessing. Why is it that as a father, you only have one blessing for a child? Why can't you bless, or if you have 10 children, you should be able to bless all your 10 children. You get what I mean? If you've got 2, if you've got 1, if you've got, you understand? So I was like, why would he, I don't understand. Why is that I have only one blessing, it's only you? I mean, in today's day and age, I will bless all my kids, even my great-grandchildren and grandchildren. I will even bless children that are not mine, Okay, so that's it. But for this particular question, I think Sister Fumi just asked, about Reuben sleeping. I don't know I can't answer your question, but what is coming to my brain is that there are a lot of cougar things going on back then. So all this cougar thing that we are seeing now, it's not new. Because how come Reuben would sleep with his mother's help, his father's concubine? Those women were older than him, right? They should be older, they should be like grandmas to him. His mother's age mates or something like that.
They said, from what I've read, they said Bilal must have been really young because those days too, they married young girls too. So she must have been young.
No matter how young they were, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That it doesn't matter.
Okay, so sorry, just to jump in, Sister Bibot there. My own issue I had with it was not only was he your father's concubine. Let's even say, okay, he was concubine by way of the fact that they weren't having children, so they kind of forced their maids down Jacob's throat. But she had children, and those children were your brothers. So you went to sleep with your brother's mother. Why would you do that? That was my thought. You understand? How did the brothers react? This is my mother.
The Bible doesn't hide anything.
No, but they were all in unity. The Bible didn't say there was any problem. All they knew is that because of that, he lost his right to being the first son because he was unstable. So, okay. we'll hope to touch on the New Testament too, because we know we didn't touch New Testament last week. Let's think. But are there any other questions? I have a couple of things I wrote down. I don't want it to be about me. So anybody else have anything else to say? But there were some things I noted about Abraham that I thought that I would want to share.
People,
But Pastor Olaolu needs to answer those questions.
People mentioned something which I'll pick on about why did Isaac only have one blessing, and that's quite interesting. So each time I read through and I study Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, you find out that Abraham also only had one blessing, because he had, apart from Isaac, he had Ishmael before him, and he had about 7 other children after that. But it was only Isaac that got the blessing. And same with Isaac, he had two children, and it was only Jacob that got the blessing. But when we get to Jacob, that blessing kind of divided in Jacob. I'm still not 100% sure why that is, but one of the reasons that we can find is that Jacob wrestled with God, because he wasn't content, he wasn't satisfied with how his life was going. And at that point of wrestling with God, God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So Jacob meant supplanter, and then Israel meant prince. So at that point, I don't know what Jacob discussed with God, but the blessing that was singular in him became multiplied at that point, and he was able to now bless all his children and not just one of them. So I think Jacob was a unique individual, and it's worth studying his life a little bit more to see, why God allowed him to be able to do that. And as we read through the scriptures, we're going to come to something that happened in the later on in the Old Testament, where a certain king, God said he was going to die. He prayed, and God turned it around. Then God said something else was going to happen. He prayed, and God turned it around. And then he did something wrong, and God said, I'm going to bring a punishment that's going to happen, but it's not going to happen in your time. It's going to happen in the time of your children. And the Bible says that he now said, okay, since it's going to happen in the time of my children, I will leave it alone. But this same guy, he had prayed on 2 occasions to change God's mind, in quotes. But on this last one, where it concerned his children, he didn't pray, he just left it. So I don't know, maybe Abraham could have done more to bring everybody in. Maybe Isaac could have done more to bring everybody in. Maybe it was God's plan, that it had to be one person at that point in time. I don't know, but we just know that there was a transition at Jacob's life, and he was able to pass on that blessing to all his children. And from that point on, everybody was passing on to all their children and not just the one.
Thanks, Pastor Lalo.
I think also, in some small way, you remember God had promised Abraham that he'll be the father of nations and da 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 da. So I think, as I say, it's split because obviously Israel became obviously the 12 tribes, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the 12 tribes came from him eventually. I suppose God needed, because remember when Abraham had Ishmael as well, and God said, no, the Ishmael, I will bless Ishmael, but he's not the one. The king, because obviously Christ came from the life from Abraham to David to Jesus Christ. It came from that line. So I suppose probably the point was the blessing will come down, because if Abraham was blessing everybody willy-nilly, I mean, I suppose it had to come from a particular line, from Abraham to his son Isaac to Jacob, and then to David and the son of David, and then Christ in the end. So God was probably streamlining that blessing situation so that it came, so the prophecy is fulfilled, as opposed to blessing Ishmael and blessing this person and blessing a whole bunch of other people. That was God's plan. That from Adam to Abraham, from Noah, Abraham, David, and eventually Jesus Christ. And that is the line from the Garden of Eden, when God said, I will your son will crush the head of the serpent and da. He was promising the human beings from that very time that the child will come from your line. So I think, that particular line has come down, because remember when God saved Noah in the ark, everybody else perished. And obviously Noah carried on, and then until Abraham came along. And so maybe that's what it was, where he had to be that line, that's God's prophecy, that's the fulfillment of God's prophecy, that this particular line will remain the line that I will fulfill my prophecy with.
Okay, so just to jump in there, I think that if you look at Abraham, Jacob and Esau, the Bible says that it speaks of Esau being a profane man. And so in his profanity, he would not have been able to carry the weight of the patriarchal blessing that was to be pushed down. So he would have been misguided. Remember when God spoke to Abraham, he said, I know Abraham because he will teach his household after me, and about the ways of the Lord. And we see that in Ishmael. When Ishmael was dying, the Bible says, God said, the angel said, I've heard the voice, I've heard his prayer. I heard him. I've heard the boy. The boy was praying. He was under Abraham's tutelage. He learned how to pray. The same thing with Eliezer of Damascus that went to get the wife. He prayed to the Lord. So his whole household was praying. You understand what I'm saying? So, but when he got to Esau, they said he was a profane man. You also saw in Esau's character that when he saw, the father said, don't go and marry these women from Canaan. And when he saw it displeased, he went to marry another one, just to make sure that they were thoroughly displeased. So I think he didn't have any value for spiritual things, like while Jacob did. And so even though he obtained the blessing deceitfully, he had value for these things. I mean, imagine wrestling with a man all night, only to ask him to bless him. That was how he wrestled for the blessings. Like he did his night vigil and said, God, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And he wrestled until he got the blessing. So he had value for those spiritual things. So I think that's why Esau couldn't have had it. And I hear some theologians say that the reason why Isaac had to be blind was because if he had his sight, he would have blessed Esau. So his eyes had to be closed so that he could give the blessing to Jacob. So, hello, are we still there?
We are there. Sister Nana, can you hear me?
Yes. So that's what some people said. Yeah,
I got everything you said, but in the part of Esau going to marry the third wife, in which he married Ishmael's daughter, reason I believe the reason he did that was he was trying to. He realized that Isaac had told Jacob to go and marry from his family, and he didn't marry from the family. Rather, he married from where they were. So he wanted to please. He wanted to please his father. That was why he felt that, okay, let me go take my father's stepbrother's daughter. Perhaps that would be pleasing to my father, not to make him more angry. He was thinking that would be pleasing to his father. That was why he went to marry from his father's family.
I think on the contrary,
I think I got the same impression as then. I thought he married a third wife to
provoke them.
Rebellious. I got that impression as well.
But why? So why didn't he marry somebody else from the village again? Why did he now marry his father's half-brother's daughter?
Remember, the father said, "Don't marry anybody from here. Go back to where I'm from." He was specific. Go back to where I'm from and go and marry. In fact, he even told him, "Go and marry your father's brother's child, your mother's brother's child." He was specific, and he said when he saw that, he told him, "Go there and marry." He went somewhere else and married them to provoke them. Remember already, the Bible had said that Rebecca was like, these women here were making him sick. The women that
I'm sorry, what part? I don't remember reading any part that Isaac specifically told Esau where to marry from. It was only Jacob.
He told Jacob. But you remember Jacob had gotten the blessing. Remember that? He had gotten the blessing. And then
Esau was already married then to two other women.
Yes, Esau had married.
Yeah, but God had already told Abraham not to marry.
There's some poetry. Maybe he had told them don't marry there, but I don't believe that.
He had told them because God had told Abraham not to marry the Canaanites, not to marry these people in this area. So they knew. and he
Yeah.
knew.
That's what I'm saying.
So
That's what I'm
Abraham-
saying. Esau.
let me jump in. So the two women that he married before were the two women that were provoking Rebecca and Isaac. And yes, he knew that he wasn't supposed to marry from that tribe. But the third one that he married, which was from Ishmael's line, because Ishmael was also a descendant of Abraham. I think he did that in trying to, to recover more or less, and not necessarily to provoke. The first two, yes, was provocative, but the third one wasn't so much, because he felt like, okay, this his brother is going to marry somebody from his mother's side. Okay, then let me marry somebody from my father's side. So maybe competitive, but not necessarily to provoke. Maybe to also try and say I'm worthy of the blessing by marrying from that side. But I have the what do you call it, the stats ready. So let me share my screen. Let me share my screen. And let me know if you can see that. Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So this is how far we've come. So we're on 3%. We've done 13 chapters so far, because today is a rest day. So we haven't read any scriptures today. So today is just about pretty much catching up, and then we continue tomorrow. So I'm sure we're probably a little bit more than 3%, maybe 3-point-something%. But the program kind of rounds it up. So by next week, we should see more progress on that. But we can see that we've read 39 in the Old Testament, 13 in the New Testament, and we have 1,137 to go. So I think we're doing well. We're doing well. So well done, everyone. Okay. So
I think
Nena,
it's
yeah.
time up, right?
Yeah. So
For 1
your
minute.
closing thoughts, please. And I know you had a couple of questions. Maybe we can pick them up next week. So if you just remind us, or if you just tell us what they are, then we'll note them for next week.
Okay, no, so thank you, everyone. Just a few questions. I didn't have the questions. I just some things I noted. And one was about Abraham and how obedient he was when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac. He got up very early the next morning. I noticed that he didn't waste time. This was his only child. It was a 3-day journey for him to change his mind, but he kept going. He didn't complain, didn't hesitate, and there was full obedience. So I thought that was great about Abraham. Even though he had his failings, when it came to obeying what God wanted, he was on point. I also wanted to talk about Leah and Rachel and how God opened their womb and closed the other one's womb and opened. And then my last question was, Pastor Laulu, what are mandrakes, please? I've Googled everywhere. I didn't understand what it meant. Is it a fertility? Is it a fertility weed or whatever? I don't know. So
It's an aphrodisiac. So it was an aphrodisiac in those
that does
days.
what?
Is like what do you call this pill now that American men especially are taking? Viagra, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I was wondering what the big deal about the mandrakes was.
Yes.
All right, okay. So, right, thank you. I don't know, whoever's going to take next week, we've not touched the New Testament at all. I mean, everybody were in the storybook telling, but we need the floggings of Jesus that started from chapter 5 downwards, and what you should do not judge, and all those things. Those were things we covered, and I think they're also very important things that we can touch on next week. So thank you, everyone. I hope we took away some lessons. I took away, most importantly, that Esau was trying to be redemptive in his actions. I thought it was the other way around. They were trying to provoke them, but I can see that school of thought and reasoning shows that he was trying to redeem himself somehow. And I think that's good. And maybe that's why he probably forgave his brother later on. I don't know. All right. Thank you, everyone. Pastor Olaolu, you want to close? We're over time, and I'm conscious that we are 4 minutes over time. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nena, for stepping in today and helping to lead us on in the conversation. This has been really good conversations tonight. And thanks everyone for all your contributions. It's so much more interesting when everyone starts chipping in and, giving opinions. So thank you all so much. We really, really appreciate it. And just keep on reading. We're at 3%. We're making progress. We can keep going. God will help us, and we'll just keep on talking, encouraging until we get across the finish line. It's still early days yet, but the Lord will help us. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful and a blessed week ahead, and keep reading. And we look forward to seeing you next week Sunday as well. All right. Good night, everyone. You can come off mute and just say good night.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you, Carla. Thank you,
Thank
Dayo.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Pastor Ayo,
Thanks,
Ibi,
Dayo.
Jolade, Pastor Paul.
Thank you, Nena. Bye.
Good night.
Bye, Jolade.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Carla.
Bye, Pastor Olaolu. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye. Bye. Olaide, thanks. Good to see you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you, Nena. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Pastor Olaolu, stop recording.
Okay. Hello, T.